Welcome to Talent Matters, the podcast where talent, skills, and grit take centre stage. I'm your host, Donal O'Donoghue, and this is episode 17. The podcast is sponsored by Sanderson, talent solutions that transform businesses globally, and Finero, the multi-award-winning tax experts who support financial success for contractors, freelancers, and solopreneurs. This episode, I'm delighted to be joined by broadcaster and dad joke connoisseur, Dave Moore.
All right, Donal.
Good. Welcome.
Thanks a million. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to see you. So, like we always like to do, we want to understand where the journey began for you.
Sure.
So, tell us a little bit about life growing up.
I grew up in Portmarnock in Dublin, where I live now. I was never really going to live where I grew up, I thought. But that's where I decided to pitch when we bought a house. And so I've kind of been that North County Dublin area all my life. Loved growing up there, the beach. Loads to do, loads of friends, so much crack. So, yeah, it was an amazing time. Like, I have nothing but good memories of growing up, and went to school locally. Then secondary school, went to Belvedere inside in town. Trinity then, what all radio broadcaster study. I did business studies in Russian.
Did you?
Yeah, perfect way to get into
Set you
radio.
up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then pursued music. That was the kind of the way I ended up in radio. But yeah, growing up was just nothing but fun and freedom, and what's now housing estates were then fields, and getting chased by farmers and going down and spending time on the beach when you weren't allowed and all those kind of things. So look, it was brilliant.
And what were you into? Was it always music, or was it music and
No,
sport? Like, what were the early
sport?
things?
Yeah, sport was definitely the early thing. Girls, and friends, and just hanging out. Music, like I did piano when I was like 7. And the typical kind of reserved piano teacher. Let's learn how to play a Chopin waltz and whatever, that kind of stuff. So I didn't particularly kind of connect or enjoy it, but I was good enough at it or whatever. And then I got put into the choir in school and did that kind of stuff. So music was there, but it was kind of in the background to sport, definitely. But then at about 11, I was playing a football match in my cousin's back garden in Limerick. And just rural Limerick, and one of those things where the back garden was as big as a football pitch. And I was out with my cousin, who was the same age as me, Stephen. And we went back inside to get a drink, and there was just this noise in the sitting room. And it was mid-80s, so it was a record was playing. And my older cousin, Emmett, Rory, and Trevor, 3 lads who I obviously idolised because they were 2 years and 4 years and 5 years older. So these were big boys, and I was 11. But they were listening to something, and I was like, "What's this, lads?" And they were like, "It's Metallica." And I was like, "What's Metallica?" And they were like, "Heavy metal. Do you not know about heavy metal?" I was like, "No." So I learned that day about heavy metal, and I went home to Dublin, a week later when I was going back with a cassette tape. And on one side was a Raven album, and the other side was Metallica's Kill 'Em All, their first album. And it it sounds kind of cliche or whatever, but it literally changed my life. It just made me feel a way about music that I hadn't felt before. And I just knew I needed to learn how to make that sound somehow. So from then on, I just pursued metal and grew my hair long and begged for an electric guitar and was constantly refused. Eventually got an acoustic guitar for, I think it was either my 12th birthday or 12th Christmas when I was 12. It was one or the other. But it was just like a terrible 3/4 size acoustic guitar and didn't sound like heavy metal, didn't sound like Metallica at all. But I learned as much as I could on that. And then when I went to secondary school, I met a guy on the first day with a Metallica t-shirt on, and I was like, "You like Metallica?" So still one of my best friends now, an amazing musician called Donal Costello. But we just bonded immediately. And then he invited me to his house, and he said, "I can make distorted guitars happen." So his dad was an electronics engineer. He didn't have an amp. He had an electric guitar, but he plugged it into a separate amp. So his dad would listen to tape and radio and record and whatever, but through this amp. But he had inverted the headphone jack to become an input, so you could put it in and hit record and play a chord, and it would come out through the speakers. It was the worst guitar sound in the world, but it was distorted. So this blew my mind. And there's still a tape somewhere of the two of us on that day doing For Whom the Bell Tolls with me without my voice broken, "Make us fight on the hill in the early days," and him playing the wrong chords, but it sounded distorted and heavy. I've got to dig that up somewhere. But that was it then. That was the bug. And it was like, how do I do that? So then, of course, buy an amp, get an electric guitar, figure all that stuff out. And then that whole thing of like 10,000 hours, whatever, I literally just learned how to play all of Metallica's back catalogue, start to finish, then move on to Slayer, then Testament, then Anthrax. And, you know, I just, so that was my deep dive into music in those early kind of teen years. And that's shaped everything.
But you still concentrated on school, did well in school, got to Trinity.
I did get
What
to
did you
Trinity.
think you were going to do when you were going through, you know, picking to go to third level? What did you think the grown-up David did?
So I got to a point where during the summers I would busk on Grafton Street, and there was long hair and goatees. Grunge was big, and we were playing.
You got to share a photograph of this after
I'll
this.
give you. I've got a great one, literally in Stephen's Green with people going, "Is that Kurt Cobain?" But I was determined at that point to be in a band. So I had been in a band with Donnacha, again, my friend, through school. That was heavy metal. That had kind of, you know, fizzled out. And then one of the reasons we didn't pursue that was it was very difficult. It isn't now, but it was very difficult to get a good distorted guitar tone on stage in the Grattan in Capel Street, or even if you were lucky on the stage in McGonagall's, which we played a couple of times as support to people. But just feedback, and amps sounded bad, and guys didn't care about miking it and whatever. So we came up with this idea after watching Pearl Jam Unplugged on MTV that maybe we could be as grungy and heavy as we wanted to be, but do it with acoustic guitars.
Because everyone was doing Unplugged then, weren't they?
Well, that was Nirvana did it,
yeah.
Alice in Chains did it, absolutely. And I guess we kind of figured it's something we can control from an audio point of view. And it's not like today where, like, you know, I have a Helix floor unit. I just like plug this thing in. It gets straight into the PA, and I can have every guitar tone in the world, and they all sound amazing. You know, this was a big kind of leap for us to go, well, let's control what we can control. So we did that. We leaned into the grunge thing, and it went really well. We won a Battle of the Bands in Trinity when we went there. But in those summers, I had kind of decided, no, I want to be a touring musician and a rock star and all these things. And then we won this Battle of the Bands, and we got recording time as a prize. A slab of beer and recording time. And I was like, okay, let's go record. We went and recorded, and it was 2 lock-ins. So like 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. 2 Saturdays in a row. And again, the guy in the studio just didn't care. It was terrible. The sound was awful. But we got to see the process of recording. And this was onto tape. This wasn't, again, digital. This was like on reel-to-reel tape, and a limited number of tracks based on the amount of faders that are available on the channels in your desk. So, but just then, actually my brain switched, and I went, no, actually I don't want to be like a recording, or I don't want to be a performing musician. I want to be in a studio. That's what I want to do. So I had made a deal with my parents during that summer before I went to Trinity, where I said, I really want to be a musician. I don't know how, but I want to be a musician. And they were like, okay, fine, we'll support you, but you have to get your degree. You have to be a good boy. You did well in school, do well in college, and whatever you want to do after that, we'll work it out. Now, I'm sure, like all parents, they thought 4 years of college doing business studies in Russian, this fella isn't going to come out the other side and want to be a rock star, but they were wrong. So, I concentrated fully on my studies. The band, I went to Russia for a year, lived there for a year, so the band kind of, again, just fizzled out because I wasn't there. Came back and focused on my finals, did well. And then there were job offers because, you know, you've got a business degree from Trinity, but you've also got a second degree where you speak Russian fluently. So, you know, you're a commodity at that point of view. So, yeah, there were offers. And I remember one came and my dad had accidentally opened it, and it was a job offer in Moscow with an apartment and a driver, which is code for bodyguard, and, you know, all these perks and flights on this, whatever. And I was like, yeah. And I went, I think I'm going to go study jazz. He was just like, what? So I had learned that out in Blackrock in New Park Music Centre. The Guilfoyle brothers, these 2 unbelievable bass player and a drummer, had this school of professional musicianship. So it wasn't just jazz, it was any type, but it was based in jazz because that's what they did. But it would teach you how to be a professional musician. So that could be a jazz player, it could be someone who goes on cruise ships and plays piano, it could be a gigging guitar player, it could be a session player, whatever. But it was a way of keeping the study element in my brain because I was so focused in 4th year. Because I think if I dropped it straight away, I probably would have struggled to just go, Okay, now I'm a musician, you know. So this was a nice kind of, you know, transition between the two. So by the time that year was over, I had taken a big bank loan out, and it was big because in those days you couldn't just buy a MacBook and a microphone. You had like a hard drive recorder, you had a mixing desk, you had microphones, you had samplers. I remember spending £1,700 on a sampler because they were only about a year old. Like now we just take it for granted. You can sample anything. This was a big deal to have this, you know, but it was going to set me apart or whatever. So I then had to tell my dad that, that job offer in Moscow, I'm going to leave that and I'm going to work in the local petrol station while I pay off the bank loan I just took out to buy a recording studio.
He must have been really proud at that stage.
Well, to be fair to him and to my mum, look, they knew I wasn't doing things half-heartedly. I wasn't kind of sitting around doing nothing. You know, I think, they wouldn't have tolerated me saying, I'm going to be a musician, I'm going to sleep in bed until 2 o'clock and watch 2 videos from Extravision and see what happens. I don't have a gig today. That wasn't on. So the fact that I had bought a studio, I was in the studio every day from like 8 in the morning. I was just in work and writing nonstop, trying to improve, just learn how to write songs and pieces of music and pop and all these things. Because being so engrossed in heavy metal and all of that genre, you know, I had let a lot of the other stuff slip past me. You know, I still appreciated it and enjoyed it. I always loved listening to the radio, but I had never studied them and I didn't kind of focus on the craft. So there was a good kind of year, 18 months of just constantly writing and banking like hundreds of songs, hundreds of pieces of music. And then when I kind of went out into the world, then I could draw on all of these things. And
what was the plan? Was it write all the songs and then try to get a deal? Or what were you
so not
thinking
for me.
about?
No,
Not for
I
you.
wanted to be studio based. I wanted to be a songwriting producer. So there's a guy called Max Martin who is from Sweden, and the 3 most successful songwriters in the world are number 1, Paul McCartney, number 2, John Lennon, and number 3, Max Martin. So I wanted to be him. Now, he wasn't that successful then, but he's had like, I don't know, almost 100 number ones. Like, he literally has written every boy band, girl band, Rihanna, you name it. And I suppose that was the dream for me, was to get to a point where I could either work with him or be a peer of his. Was kind of, now he was a lot older than I was and successful. I was just a guy in Dublin. But I just basically started working, just started writing. And as I said, then when people, this was the era of Boys Own into Westlife, you know, there were Irish pop bands happening. So people would constantly think, oh, well, my daughter and her friends can be, so they needed songs. So they would come to someone like me. I'd give them a CD of 10 songs. They'd go and pick 3. We'd record them, but sure, I'd have them already written, produced, the backing vocals done, they come in and sing the lead. And then I'd farm them out the CD, and then they try and get a deal. So I was getting them to the level where they would then try and shop themselves, but I was just pure studio based, and that was the plan. I considered going to Stockholm and trying to track down Max Martin or Andreas Carlson or any of these guys, and it just circumstances just never came to be. And I fell in love, and things changed, and I just focused on things slightly differently. But that was the plan. The plan was be a writer producer, and just I did it for 5 years. That was all I did. I was just like, you know, and I loved every single second of it, being in the studios and just working with people. And I still do it now. Like, I don't do it as much, obviously. I've got another job now that distracts me a lot, and a family and all those things. But when I can, I do things. And even like a year, 2 years ago, I did a piece of music for a Netflix show, and you know, you just kind of see that up there and you go, yeah, there's still life in the old dog, yeah, you know what I mean? So
how did you go from that to radio?
Not a career path that anybody should ever try and emulate, because it just doesn't happen this way. But I was I'd written the music for a musical play that Des Bishop was doing with actor Arthur Reardon, amazing show called Rap Era. And it was basically the history of Irish nationalism and republicanism told through rap, okay? So Des was kind of the narrator, and Arthur was Eamon de Valera, and it was a cast. It was just unbelievable. But to get to the music for that was great. But we were touring it, so it was in Dublin and Cork and Limerick. And in the Limerick show, we were just out for dinner before one of the shows. And as a working, you know, freelance person, you do everything to just get a bit of money, because I could make all my annual salary in one big job in February and then have to kind of make that work out. If I don't get another job till August, what am I going to do? So Des was saying, you should do voiceovers. Like, you got a good voice. You're constantly, you know, you're talking, you're doing impersonations, you do comedy things, you know, like people could use you. And I was like, but how do you do that? You need an agent. And he was like, the producer of our show is the biggest acting agent in Ireland. And I was like, Richard? I didn't know. He was like literally Richard Cook, like Lisa Richards' agency. So I turned around to him and said, will you be my agent? He was like, yeah, of course. Like, so I went home and recorded a 3-minute demo of just kind of, it was just one sentence, basically. It was one paragraph, but it just like hundreds of voices in it. Gave it to him. I printed off like, maybe 20 CDs, packaged up a little, because again, you were self-sufficient in those days. You'd buy your blank CDs and print out your little picture and your name, whatever. Gave it to him, and he shopped it around to all the recording studios in town. That's what used to happen. So the recording studio would get a client in who would go, we're Apache Pizza and we want to do an ad. And then they'd go, well, let me get a CD out. Or here's John, he does this. Or here's Donal, he's this. Here's Dave, he's this kind of fella. And they would listen to a CD and go, yeah, no, he sounds good, whatever. So I did one job for a pizza company. It wasn't Apache, someone else. Other pizza companies are available. And then the next call I got was from a woman who was very secretive. And she simply said, I want to talk to you about a project. Can you meet me in town today? And again, being freelance, I was like, okay, well, I'll drop that project and meet this woman who hopefully will give me a job, but they'll pay me some money. So I went into town and sat in a cafe in town. And then 2 men came in and kind of, oh, hello, Karen was her name, John, Dan, they sat down and they didn't introduce they introduced themselves, but not who they were. I had no idea what this was. And it was good cop, bad cop. And John was very friendly. And Dan would sit there and listen to everything I say and then jump in and go, who's the captain of the Dublin football team? And I go, I don't like GAA. I don't know. And he'd go off again. And the conversation would go on about something else. And then they left. And
That's
then
weird.
Very weird. And then I left and she rang me kind of on the way home and went, oh, the 2 lads were very impressed. And I was like, what is this for? And she's like, I can't tell you. Can you come in on Wednesday? This was Monday. I was like, come in on Wednesday. Okay, come back in Wednesday. Yeah, no problem. So I went into a recording studio in Marion Square, read some stuff off a sheet that I didn't really understand what it was. It was just kind of taglines to ads and things. I didn't really understand what was going on. I thought, okay, this is voiceover work. This makes sense. And then she handed me like a mini disc recorder and a microphone. I went, just go out and describe something around here. I was like, okay. And like, I'm trying to put it together going, what could this possibly be? So I walked out and I saw a group of kids at one of these private schools who wear like all these gorgeous uniforms, but like little boater hats in Marion Square, very well to do. And I kind of described them and just how cute it was and how interesting it was and how different it was to some of the other surrounding areas in Dublin and whatever. Brought that back, and then it was like, great, can you come back in on Friday? And I actually went, do you know what? Not until you tell me what's going on. She said, I'll tell you on Friday. So I came back in on Friday.
Talk about building suspense.
Yeah, I know. To a place called Grand Canal Quay, which I'd never been to. It's just off Pier Street. And went into a building called the Malt House, but into the north block of the Malt House. And got up there, and this woman, Karen, simply opened the door. There was a fella in there about my age, and she went, Dermot, this is Dave. Dave, this is Dermot. You two get on. I'll be back in 20 minutes. And she closed the door. Now I'm looking at him, he's looking at me, and I'm like, how's it going? He's like, hey, how are you? And I went, do you know what this is? And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, what is this? And he's like, this is 98 FM. And I was like, the radio station? He's like, yeah, do you not work on radio? I was like, no. And he goes, maybe you shouldn't be here. So I'm like, yeah, I kind of feel like that. And he was like, yeah, I think they're going to give me the breakfast show on 98 FM, but you don't work on radio. I was like, no. I was like, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, we just got chatting. We bonded immediately over, I don't know how we got on to Alan Partridge, but the fact we both love Alan Partridge, and we impressioned off each other and had a bit of crack. And then she came back in and she was like chatting away, and then explained that she didn't even work for 98 FM, but she had been tasked by Dennis O'Brien to go and find new talent that had never been on radio before to come in and try out for the breakfast show. So I was like, you've got the wrong person. Like, I'm a musician. I've never been in a radio station. I don't listen to the radio. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And she's like, no, I think there's something here. You're going to try it out. And I was like, okay, but I've also got this project on. I've got to do this thing. She's like, yeah, you can do all that, whatever. So within a month, we were on air on the biggest breakfast show in Dublin. And I remember about 2 years in, show you how naive I was. I thought you started on breakfast because that's the first thing I got. So I was like, okay, breakfast, and one day you'll work up to mid-mornings and up to maybe to drive is the big. I didn't understand. Breakfast is the big thing. Like, I didn't know this about radio. And it was literally only about a year and a half later I realized, oh my God, like, They gave me the biggest job at the radio station on the biggest station in the city. Literally walking in off the street.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Especially when you think, going back to that time, that breakfast radio was all about forced hilarity in the morning, and it had become so canned and so cheesy trying to replicate what was being done in Australia or whatever. And actually, they did the right thing. They got fresh talent that wasn't going to replicate.
I literally couldn't replicate because I didn't know anything. And I think that is genuinely what created the success for us. We were immediately successful. Like within our first ratings book was number one. Like that, and the reason the previous breakfast show had been let go was because obviously we were number 3, you know. So I say the biggest show. We were the biggest heritage station in the city, but the breakfast show was down the pecking order. So we brought it straight back up, and then it stayed there. And I was in 98 FM for 12 years. Did 8 years on breakfast, 4 years on drive, and then Today FM came knocking. But it was definitely not a traditional route into broadcasting. And I mean, everybody else I know in broadcasting always wanted to work in radio and worked in like broadcast out of a shed on a pirate station, whatever.
Really earned their stripes and did all the crappy
And I walked
jobs.
in and went, "Hello, I'm on the breakfast show," and I'm sure they're all very polite and all. I'm sure they were cursing me. You know what I mean? Like, who is this? Literally, who is this guy? He doesn't even know himself who he is. Like, you know, that was the truth.
So let's take it back to skills then. So you'd spent a few years developing all your music production skills. How transferable is that to radio?
Hugely. So being in a studio environment is a studio environment. You know, even where we are now, it's a room, it's gorgeous, but it's a studio environment. So microphones, you know, levels, peaking, EQing, compression, all these things that come into play when you're in anywhere where there's recording going on, whether it's live broadcasting or whether it's recording, whatever. There's a studio environment and an etiquette and an understanding of the room and all the bits, whatever. So from a technical point of view, like for example, because I'd never been in a radio studio, I didn't run the desk. Dermot ran the desk. And within I don't know, I'm going to say less than 6 months. It could have been less, it could have been more, but in and around that time, we flipped. And I ran the desk because I'm much more a multitasker than he is. Whereas you give him a microphone and tell him to be funny, you're onto a winner. But tell him to be funny and cue up a mini disc and go to the news on time and work out how long is left in the ad. Like, that's not his skill set. Whereas I was like, I can do all of that and be the guy with Dermot. Do you know what I mean? So,
and how important is that? Because from the little bit of radio that I've popped in to do, you see a real variety. You see sometimes the broadcasters running the desk and sometimes them just pointing the finger in through the window. So,
I mean, anything's any way that gets the best thing out of the speakers, I think, is the most important thing. Like for example, in Today FM, you should say you've been on Matt Cooper loads in the last word. Matt likes to sit in a separate room with his microphone and his prep, and that's how he does the show, and someone else runs the desk. I couldn't think of anything worse than having anybody else touch a fader for me. I want to be in control. And as difficult as that is, because it adds so much complexity to your job and your brain works honestly so much harder, I love it. And I need that control. I find it, if I'm ever a guest on a radio show, I find it really off-putting because I'm like, oh, I don't get to press the button, or I don't pull the fader to a certain level, or I don't, you know, it's just a weird thing, but I love that control. But Matt Cooper's show sounds great. I hope my show sounds great. It doesn't matter how it happens in the background. What matters is what comes out of the speakers.
Cool. Okay. So tell me a little bit about the show, how it developed over the years, because it's what, 21
years of myself and Dermot, and we're 22 years now because I'm now solo since September, end of August.
So from when you moved to Today FM,
Yeah.
what's been the progression or the development?
So the development was simple. We went in at lunchtime. It had been a bit of a kind of a difficult slot for Today FM for a while. There had been lots of people had tried it, and just for whatever reason, just certain things didn't work out. We went in and we just found our audience and we found our tone, and it was very different to 98. Like 98 was hot and in your face, and Today FM was really laid back, and we kind of had to adjust that. But we also had to drag the listeners up a bit in terms of energy and stuff. I think that's maybe what they were missing. So we found a balance in there, and that went really well. And about 18 months in, there was a gap in 9 to 12. Now, I remember having a conversation with the boss at the time. Not at the time, sorry. Maybe about 6 months previous, where somebody joked that Dermot and Dave should do the 9 to 12 slot. And he laughed and said, I would love to hear Dermot and Dave having a serious conversation. It would just be so out of character. And like, but he meant it as a joke. He didn't mean, I want to hear it. He meant like, you wouldn't be able for it kind of comment. And 6 months later, there was a window and they came to us and they went, we think we want you to do this. And I was like, I remember you said in the kitchen. And he was like, no, I know. But I think, we can see what you could achieve in this slot. Do you want to give it a go? And the two of us were like, yeah, like this is a chance to talk more. So, as a broadcaster, you're always fighting against the amount of songs you have to play and fighting against the news and fighting against the amount of ads there are because you're egotistical and you want to have the microphone time. So this would have gone from, I can't remember, but maybe like 11 songs an hour to 6, and that's a lot more space to express yourself and to have fun and do things. So we did it. Now, it was a real challenge. That would have been 2017, January 2017. And it was a real challenge because what had been before was Ray D'Arcy for a decade and more, hugely successful, but a very specific type of radio. Anton Savage had gone in, and it hadn't worked for Anton for whatever reason. That happens all across radio all the time. Things just don't suit, whatever. Nothing to do with how good a broadcaster you are. But again, it was very current affairs. It was very look at the papers, and you do not hire us for that. Like, that's not why you hire Dermot and Dave. You hire Dermot and Dave for personality. You hire Dermot and Dave for fun, and you hire Dermot and Dave for being able to cover serious things, but not in the way that Ray D'Arcy or Anton Savage would do it. So, we had to adapt by. We couldn't project all of our personality immediately. Much like when we joined and in lunchtime, we had to bring the energy up. We had to bring the style and the tone of radio slowly turn the volume on our kind of madness and crackology up while still covering a familiar, content pieces that people who listen to that for 10 or 15 years would expect to hear. And I think within about 18 months, we had turned it up to 11 and we were just doing Dermot and Dave stuff and it grew and grew and grew and grew and went, through the roof. But that was a big challenge, trying to adapt. Because the one thing about radio is it's relentless. Like, you can do a good radio link and play a song, and 2 minutes and 47 seconds later you can do a bad radio link, and then play a song, and in 2 minutes and 53 seconds you can do, and you get a chance on a link. So it never stops, and it's hour after hour, and it's day after day. So you don't have time to kind of go, this is good, this is bad. Like, you have to set time in a calendar, and every few months go, how are we doing? Like, let's sit down in a room, not in the station, like the room here, and sit down with a whiteboard and write down all the bits of the show. And is that actually working? How can we improve that? If we make a tweak here, will that change that and make that work? Like, there's all these little things that we have to do. And if you don't do those things, you'll get swallowed up by the relentlessness of radio. And next thing you know, you'll be a year down the line and your control will have slipped and your quality will have slipped, and you go, I don't know why. Slip. That's it. And then you're done, And once the numbers go, it's impossible, really, So there are real challenges. So the challenge of going from breakfast to drive in 98 FM, the challenge of going from 98 FM to Today FM, the challenge of going from lunchtime to 9 to 12. Like, these are all big, big swinging shifts. And then within those time periods, you're making, micro changes every day, and you're making macro changes every quarter, and so I know to a lot of people it seems like it's just so much crack all the time.
Just turn up and talk a lot of jazz.
Yeah. But there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes. It is such a brain intensive job. Like, it's not physically intensive. I don't have to go and, build block walls or not block walls. But from a brain point of view, those 3 hours, it's never 3 hours, It's an hour and a half, 2 hours before. It's an hour and a half, 2 hours afterwards. And all through the day, every day. I always say you're always recording. You're just constantly thinking of content. Is there something in what's just happened that I can turn into content tomorrow or in next week or whatever? You're just constantly thinking that.
You became a product, Dermot and Dave, to an extent.
Yep.
How would you describe it? What did it become over the 20 years? Not just the radio show, but how you iterated in other areas.
I suppose we were really, you talked about the kind of the style of radio that existed before we started, or around the time we started, things were starting to change, where radio DJs were superstars in the sense that, like, if Marty Whelan came to your town in 1987, like, the place would, women would fall down, and it was unbelievable. Whereas by the time we started, and this was probably the genius of the recruitment, was we were just two lads. We were very relatable. We weren't trying to be, our voices sounded the same on air and off air. It wasn't like, oh, Donald, great to talk to you today. I'm delighted to be here and talking to your podcast. Like, that just wasn't us. But we didn't know any better, but also I don't think either of us would have done that. And there were the beginnings of that in rival stations. People are starting to realize, no, hang on, you can be yourself. Probably a heightened version of yourself, a more exaggerated version of yourself, but you can still pretty much be yourself. So I think one of the things we really were was relatable. We were fun. We were all those, industry words like irreverent and all those things, whatever. But we were also never exclusionary. We were never, we would try and appeal as much to an 8-year-old as an 80-year-old and everyone in between. Obviously, you have your target audience in everything you do. But we would always have figured, like, well, why would we do that if it meant that, for example, using a swear word, crime on breakfast radio anyway, but even beeping it out or something like it, well, maybe the mom's driving the kids to school, just take it out. Like, does it really add in? Okay, there are times when it's really effective, a beep particularly, but 99 times out of 100, you can probably just change the lyric or change the joke or change something and just do it a different way. So we always kind of approached it just to try and be all of the things we were. So, as I said, a little bit left of center. Lads you probably wanted to hang out with was kind of what we were thinking of, when we were doing things like it. But that was just our natural personalities. We were never like a fake version of ourselves. We were just probably a heightened version of ourselves. But that was a key thing. And it applied, as you said, outside of radio then. So we could go and host an awards night, but we'd bring our fun and, approachability. And if it was sitting down for a bite to eat at the top table and someone wanted a photograph, of course, those kinds of things were just part of our makeup, our DNA. We were more than happy for that to be the case. So we then translated that into live shows. We did comedy tours. They were hugely successful. And yeah, we realized that there was the brand of Dermot and Dave. It was a thing. And probably one of the biggest challenges when everything changed about 8 months ago, it was the fact that Dermot and Dave had been established for 21 years. To take the Dermot and bit out of it and turn it into Dave Moore was a big challenge for everybody involved, and particularly for me. But that was, that's just an evolution of what I've done for the last 20 odd years. This is just the next phase of that,
Were you expecting Dermot to change direction?
I was, yeah. He and I are literally best friends, and I say that so aware, hyper aware of how fortunate I was, and I am still, to have him as a friend, but how fortunate I was to work with my best friend every day. Didn't know each other from Adam until that adult play date when they closed the door and said, get on. But almost I joked, because I said we bonded over Alan Partridge. Alan Partridge has a line where his girlfriend asks him if he likes this guy he's met called Dan, and he says, yeah, I like Dan. I'm convinced he's my best friend. And he's met him one time in a petrol station. I rang my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and I made that joke. She was like, so Dermot, who's this guy? I was like, oh yeah, is he nice? I'm convinced he's my best friend. And she laughed, whatever. But it turns out I was right. He is my best friend. So yeah, look, a number of years ago, Dermot moved into the mindfulness space and the meditation space and took it very seriously. And I knew he was taking it seriously, and he studied it, and it wasn't something he did kind of just for a bit of crack. He was building a business, and I was hugely supportive of that, as he always is with everything I do. We were always two separate individuals, as well as you said, the brand of Dermot and Dave and the relationship that exists there. We also really respected each other's space and respected each other's separate interests. And there was never a case of either of us ever holding the other one back. So, you know, contracts in radio are done over a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. And, you know, the signing of a previous contract, he and I had talked about the fact that he wasn't 100% sure, but circumstances was he signed it and we kept going. So by the time we kind of got, you know, maybe 18 months through the contract, we had more chats, and I was pretty convinced that he was going to not sign a new one. But, you know, but he had to come to that conclusion, and he had to be prepared for everything that required. So yeah, when it kind of came to the conversation where he said, yeah, I'm going to try this, I couldn't have been happier for him. I was obviously concerned. There's no guarantee that the radio station was going to have me continue solo or otherwise. Having always been part of a duo, no one's ever heard you on your own. Okay, Dermot's on holidays, Dermot's been sick, or whatever. They hear an odd snippet, but they don't know what you're like over a long period of time, and neither do you. So the challenges were huge. Genuinely the biggest professional challenges of my career was this change, and also the time frame which we had to do it, or the time frame I felt we had to do it in, which was tight and
how
quick.
tight?
2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah,
That is tight.
2 weeks. So there were prep talks pre Dermot's departure, but he left on a Friday, and 2 weeks later I started on the Monday 2 weeks later. So the reason I wanted to do that was because I felt the audience had bought into the idea. Now they were told on a Tuesday, and he left on a Friday. It wasn't a long time for them to accept and understand this, but the instant reaction was, best of luck, Dermot, and we're here with you, Dave. And I'll never forget that for the rest of my days. Like that, and that was from just the public. The connection we have with our audience is just amazing, and they're so behind Dermot, and they're so behind me.
He's done incredibly, actually. To be fair, he's obviously found his purpose, and is doing great
I couldn't be
stuff.
happier for him. Like he knew he couldn't. He used to say to me, like, am I making a mistake? And I would simply project into the future. I say, I want you to go 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Do you want to be sitting here with me, reading out a cash machine total, teeing up a call or whatever? And he's like, colour would drain from his face, and you go, no. And I go, you're doing the right thing. Like, that's all I want to do. This is all. I'm at the top of my mountain. This is what I want to do for the rest of my days. And the other little bits I do around the side are fine, but this is what I want to be the tree trunk of who I am professionally. You don't want that. He's like, I don't. It's like, well, go and do that thing then. And whatever happens, happens. But if you don't do it, you'll break this show, you'll break us, you'll break yourself, and you're going to regret everything. Whereas you don't want to look back in 5 years and go, what if you're ready now, do it. And it's flying for him. I'm so happy for him.
Delighted to see it. What did you do in the 2 weeks to adjust?
So the 2 weeks was a lot of meetings and a trip to Spain to just get out of all the meetings. So yeah, on the run up to say maybe because don't forget, sorry, in the middle of all this, I went to Australia with Dermot, with the show, to cover the Women's World Cup, because I'm so hugely passionate about football, particularly women's football. I have 9-year-old daughters, and I coach them and their friends, and it's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. And I just think women's football is such a representation of what we as a society should be pushing towards, and what we are going towards, and what we need to do. And I couldn't love it anymore. So I was determined to get to the World Cup, and we twisted some arms, and Sky came in and were very good to us, and we all went together. But that was kind of the last hurrah of Dermot and Dave. So before that, there were meetings. Now, not huge amounts of meetings, but enough meetings to get our brains thinking of myself and my team. Because that was the key buy-in from the radio station. Was I asked them, because the logic would be, well, hang on, we're making a new product. So let's take the production team and move them somewhere else and give you a new team. And I was like, actually, if you trust me enough, I promise I won't give you a generic derivative version of that came before, because I have no investment in that. If I do that, we're all going to be out of this in a couple of weeks or a month or whatever. I will give you a new show, but I want the kind of solidity of my team around me. So Maria, my producer, Carl and Emer, the two people who work on the show with us, the three of us together, there's three of them and me, the four of us together, that team was so vital to the success of what's happened since, that if I didn't have that, if I had to get to know a new producer or a new set of, like assistant producer, like that would have been so difficult. Whereas they know exactly what I need. We had devised the show together. And so having that familiarity, understanding, but also drive, the three of them are so driven to make this show a success, as am I, that it was the perfect scenario to try and do what we wanted to do. And I'm really grateful to the station for believing them, but also more importantly to those three guys for doing this with me, because like it wouldn't be half the show it is without them. They really understood from the word go and bought into everything I wanted to do. So it's just been amazing.
Tell me about the podcast.
Yeah. So Neil Delamere and I have a podcast called Why Would You Tell Me That? And it is a way for us to try and out-fact each other, because no one else will listen to our facts. So for 20 years, or maybe about 18 years, because I'm not sure what year I started it, but for most of my radio career, I did a thing called Dave's World. And the idea of Dave's World was, I love facts, and I love as boring and as nerdy and as irrelevant a fact as is humanly possible.
Give us an example.
Like slugs taste with their feet. That's, that little nugget there, that makes me so happy. And Dermot hates that stuff. But again, rather than him saying, well, we can't do it on the show because I don't like it, we copped on, well, hang on, this is a perfect microcosm of our relationship. I'm trying to educate you in something you're not interested in, and you are going to just abuse me for 3.5 minutes on the radio, and then we'll play a song. And people, it's the longest running radio segment that I've ever had. And we had it, as I said, I think it was probably 1.5 years, maybe, so 2004, say, and it ran until 2024. So it's 2023. So it was 19 years of this exact scenario. Neil Delamere would come in as a guest, and he would always ask, can I come in for Dave's World? And we'd say yes. And the reason is, so we put his interview after Dave's World, but he came in because he wanted to try and out-fact me in Dave's World. So this relationship built over the years. We've been interviewing him since he started his comedy career, so probably, again, 15 years, 20 years. But he and I have always hit it off, always been friendly rather than friends. We just didn't hang out with each other outside of the moments he was in the studio, or I might meet him somewhere or whatever. But he loves television and I don't. And he would constantly try and get me onto a TV show that he was working on. So if it was a comedy panel show, he'd go, will you be a team captain? No. Will you be the host? And I'll be a team captain? No. And I would never do any of those things. I don't enjoy them. I don't like them. I love radio. Radio is brain, mouth, microphone, you, right? Television is brain, mouth, piece of paper, and then 500 people and 20 months until something goes on television. You may not even be told about it and go, oh, my thing is on. And then people are going to go, and you look at it and go, that's not what I thought it was going to be like. It's someone else. It's the editor's medium rather than the presenter's. Whereas radio is just so immediate. And I love that about radio and the freedom and control you have. And nothing about TV appeals to me from that way. So he kept trying, and he goes, I'm doing a documentary on the Vikings. Are you doing it? No. I'm going to do a live animal show thing. No. So eventually he sat me down over a cup of tea one day. He went, what will you do? And I went, I don't know. He goes, is there anything in television you like? So I love sitcoms. I'm obsessed with sitcoms. He goes, would you be in one? No. Would you write one? I would, yeah. Would you want to write a sitcom? Okay. So we sat down together and we wrote a pilot episode for a sitcom. And we made her laugh so hard. And then I went, is this any good? He goes, I don't know, but every page is making me laugh. So we sent it out to, through agencies, we sent it out to production companies in the UK. And it got picked up instantly by a Scottish production company. And they gave us a bunch of money and went, there you go, that's for developing the pilot. Thanks very much. We're going to shop around to the stations and to the production companies now to see if we can get it made. Now, it didn't ever get picked up beyond that, but it kind of validated our working relationship. We were really effective together, quick, productive, and we think producing quality content. So we sat down again after, nothing kind of happened with that, but went, yeah, that was really good fun. Like, we really enjoyed it. Like, is there something else we could do? And I had been hemming and hawing about a podcast But doing radio, 15 hours a week, I was like, I don't know. Is there anything I really want to do? Do I want to do a Man United podcast? Do I want to do a music podcast? Do I want to do? And there have been a couple of people in the UK who were creating podcasts with me in mind, and I was tempted to do them, but nothing really fitted into the shape that I wanted. And then we were just again having lunch, and he told me something, and I said, "Oh, do you know this?" And I again told him this incredible fact, and he went, "We should do a podcast on this." And I went, "Oh my God, we should so do a podcast on this." Because look, podcasting by its very nature is niche, right? The idea of a podcast is that, you get the chance to dive into something, whether it is train timetables in Kuala Lumpur. If that's your thing, you can do a podcast on that. If it's the NFL, do it on that, whatever. But you get the chance to deep dive on something. And I was like, we'll find an audience who also love facts and wild stories and incredible claims. So we came up with this format for the podcast, which is each week, one of us is effectively the host. The other person is completely in the dark, doesn't know who the guest is, doesn't know what the subject is until we start recording. So due to timing, there may be a 20-minute window in between part 1 and part 2 where I've already said what the topic is and who the guest is. Now, the guest is usually an academic. You're not going to know them. But where Neil might get a chance to then think, oh, what do I know about that? Or vice versa. I might go, oh, I remember something about, but that's all you have. So you are literally, when you're not the host, you're the voice of the audience. You're hopefully asking the questions that the uninformed, and I don't mean that in a derogatory, I just mean you haven't researched the volcanic eruption of Mount Tambora in 1812 in Indonesia. I have, and this guy's the expert on it. But Neil is, hang on, I'm listening to this for the first time. What the hell happened? So that's the idea. And so once we devised that format, I knew we were onto a winner. I just knew this is going to work. Now, your definition of a winner, your definition of how it works in podcast land is up to you, right? My definition is, do I want to keep doing it? Do I love doing it? Absolutely. We're season, we either finished season 5 or in 6. I think we're finished 6, we're going to 7. I don't remember, but we are gung-ho. We love it. We love sourcing the guests, finding the stories, and then trying to make each other laugh. That's the dream. So we're going to keep going.
Brilliant. Going back to the show, I have to ask you, because you've talked to some pretty interesting guests, and with all the people that are promoting movies or albums and stuff like that. Who are the ones that stick out in your mind, best or worst?
Well, just actually in general about that, when that started to creep in as something on this 9 to 12 time slot, it's a natural, because you got time, it's a natural place to get someone in for an interview. And it could be you, or it could be, an athlete, or it could be a movie star, or it could be just someone who has Ireland's oldest cow. Like, it could be, it's everything's an interview, everything's a chat. And I found myself in meetings, like I said, described before, where we would assess, every 3 months or so, you'd sit down and you go, what's working? I remember being in a meeting going, I would never interview a celebrity again and be quite happy. I want to interview the person with the oldest cow, or the guy who, lost his tarantula in his mother-in-law's house. That's what I want to do. And I suppose that is the essence of the show that we do. It's about connecting with the real audience all of the time. But these movie things and these musician scenarios and these people of profile just started to present themselves more and more and more. And then lockdown hit. And then what happened to movie junkets? So we would never go on movie junkets because you usually have to fly to London. You miss a day of the show. You get 4 minutes with Tom Cruise and you fly home. It's not worth it from our listeners' point of view to lose a Dermot and Dave show 3 hours, upset the rhythm of their week for us to get 4 minutes with Tom Cruise. Like, we're not being dicks about it, but it just isn't. So we just wouldn't do them. Occasionally, if it worked out from a time, you could fly on a Sunday, do the show from London, do the movie interview, fly back on the Monday and go back. You're back on there. So you didn't really miss. Maybe the show sounded a bit different on Monday because you're in a different studio, but that was fine. But then lockdown happened, and all of a sudden you could interview Tom Cruise on your computer or laptop at home. It was like, oh, hang on, this changes everything. And I do remember that year, 2020, just going from being able to remember individual interviews of, yeah, we did interview Will Ferrell. Yeah, wow. God, I did interview the guys from Jackass. Cool. Yeah, Ronan O'Gara was in that day. To like, I literally can't, you couldn't, like it happened the other day. I was watching the Eurovision and I went, where do I know your woman from? My wife was going, it's Malin Ackerman. She's an actress. She's been in this. I was like, yeah, I seem to know her better than that. And then I went into work and said it. And Emer, who works for my team, went, you interviewed her in 2020 and you would have watched 3 of her movies and you would have looked at interviews of her and she came up on your screen. And I was like, did not remember that. But like, that's even a bad example. Like I interview people. Sometimes they go, oh, I remember the last time. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, I interviewed this guy before, like, so it's just become, so the access has just exploded. And rather than resent the kind of celebrity interview, which is difficult, it's a very difficult thing to do, and make it not wallpaper, because they are on a train, and whether it's music or movies or promoting a book or whatever, it's just, they're just, I'm doing you and then I'm going there, and then and if it's virtual, it's like, yeah, you file out and then the German station comes in and they file out and the Romanian one comes in, and it's just, so rather than kind of resent that, which is what was beginning to happen to me back before lockdown, I kind of went, well, hang on, if this is going to happen, how can we make them funner? How can they give us a moment, which is this kind of radio thing, but like, you're looking for something that you can hang the interview on and go, I'm going to get, Daniel Craig to do this, or I'm going to do something that's going to make Sandra Bullock laugh. That's once I started approaching from that point of view, I've now realized that there's a very particular skill set required to do that. And you need to work very, very hard at it. And again, it's like people think you rock up and use a microphone. They listen to the interview and go, yeah, that was great. I really enjoyed that. They don't realize that probably took me 4 days of prep to do that 8 minutes and make it exactly the way it is. But it's worth it.
Yeah.
So now, like, I literally, I would sound like an absolute tool if I listed off the people I've interviewed, even in the last 2 weeks. It's ridiculous, So yeah, it's been an amazing journey to kind of learn that skill set, to learn how to engage and disarm someone on a train of interviews when I have 4 minutes and I have to talk about the movie.
Yeah.
Like, that's something I've learned that I'm now very confident in, but it only comes with hard work.
I love the Mission Impossible theme.
See, there you go. So this is a perfect example of research, right? So what I would do, so the Mission Impossible one you're referencing is the famous theme tune Mission Impossible, which is ding, 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 is long, long, short, short. The notes are long, long, short, short, and that's Morse code for M and I, Mission Impossible. The composer of this, Lalo Schifrin, did this back in the 60s. I didn't do it, but the stars of Mission Impossible did not know this, and I took a chance. Now, I found this nugget, and I went like, there's a good chance, of course they know this. They're working on Mission Impossible movies. They probably know every bit of trivia there is. But they didn't. They didn't have a clue. Simon Pegg did not know that this was a thing. Rebecca Ferguson was like, what?
Yeah, mind blown.
What was amazing was, having done the work to find something that's slightly different than everyone else is told, and this is a testament to both of their characters, when Simon and Rebecca were in another interview days later, Simon in particular, referenced Dave from Dermot and Dave on Today FM, told me this, and it was to NME. Again, another thing that I would have dreamed of ever getting to mention on anything to do with NME as a musician, but he didn't have to do that. But it just goes to show that it cut through. So when he was finished that train of interviews, he remembered Dave from Dermot and Dave on Today FM in Ireland was different than the other 17 interviews. So that when he was on the NME one 2 or 3 days later, he could go, hey, did you hear about this? Like, that stuff's amazing. But that's kind of what you're aiming for. I don't mean that exact scenario, but you're aiming to cut through the kind of mundanity of what they have to do. They have to sell the movie, have to sell the album, have to sell the tour, have to sell the record, the book, whatever. And I totally respect it. They do not in any way have to be entertaining. So you have to try and figure out a way to make that happen. And that's the joy. And sometimes they blow you away, like Jack Black. So I interviewed Jack Black for Kung Fu Panda 4. Again, I've got 5 minutes, I think I have with him. So I need to talk about the movie, and I need to figure out a way. And I watch the movie, and I know the movie. My kids know the movies, and I'm kind of, so there's a phrase he uses called skadoosh. His character Paul uses this, but I noticed particularly in 4, he didn't. So skadoosh sounds like skadoosh. It's like a cool, joyous thing. But I noticed he was using it in different ways. And I went, oh, it's kind of his tone sets the meaning of skadoosh. And I was going, God, that's kind of like, in Irish English, like we do that a lot, like that famous thing of like, if someone says to you, will you go and help me with the shopping? And you say, I will, yeah. It means you won't. Like, though, we have those things in Irish English particularly. And I kind of racked my brain, like, what is there an Irish version of skadoosh? And I came up with something that we used to have in the show called Sure Look It, isn't that it? And I said that to him. And I said, look, the Irish version of that. And he practiced and he was like, sure, look it, isn't that it? In the way Americans do. But it was brilliant. And then within the 5 minutes, I also knew I love his band, Tenacious D. They're one of my favorite bands in the world. I can't get enough of them. But I was like, I can't make the whole interview about that because then the movie company won't give us the next interview because they didn't talk enough about Kung Fu Panda or whatever. So I did the Asher Look It thing, and then I held up my Tenacious D record because he was now disarmed, and now he's like, he said, we got to Sharpie that up for you, man, because I wasn't signed, obviously. And I was like, that'll be amazing. I'm coming to see you guys in May. I can't wait. And he's like, no, we got to do that. I was like, yeah, cool. And then, wrap up the interview. So when the interview wraps, it's like, thanks so much for talking to me today, Jack. Like, best luck Kung Fu Panda 4. Hey, thanks, Dave. Interview's over. Guy hits stop on the record. But Jack goes, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. And he's calling Melissa, his assistant or whatever her name was, who's somewhere on another Zoom screen somewhere in there. And he's like, can we make sure I get to see Dave in Dublin and I sign his album? And I'm like, oh man, like seriously, I thought, you're just saying that for the interview. Like, that's really kind of you. Again, in my head going, this isn't going to happen, I'm like, that's really soundy. Like, I really appreciate that. And he goes, sure, look it, isn't that it? And I was like, oh my God, this is like full circle thing. Now, of course, the guy wasn't recording, so I don't have that audio. But anyway, that was, say, March. So May's rolling around and I'm going to the Tenacious D gig. I'm like, I remember Jack Black said he was going to sign that and he asked his assistant, but I haven't heard from anyone, so I think I'll just go to the show. But then I was going, but I want to bring the vinyl just in case. So I'm hemming and hawing with my friend who's going with me and I'm going, I think I'm going to bring it. He goes, bring a marker, bring the bag. Like, they'll let you in. I was like, yeah. And then 2 days before, I got an email from his assistant saying, Jack has left passes for you at the door. He'd love to sign your record. And I'm like,
deadly.
What? So go to the show, AAA passes for afterwards and meet Kyle Gass and Jack Black, and he remembers and he signs it. And like, he's everything you want him to be. He is that. He did not have to do that. There's no benefit for him. Like, he's in a Kung Fu Panda 4 interview with that hat on. And then he's over here in Ireland with his Tenacious D hat on. They're not connected. I know Jack Black is a brand, as Dermot Day was a brand as well, but he doesn't have to do that. And to transfer and make the connection between those two things, I just thought was just one of those moments where you realize. But
that's the skill. That's the skill of human connection and actually that bit of research and finding.
Yeah, it probably is. It's probably
the secret
is.
sauce, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think, if I had just produced the Tenacious D record and the interview had been pretty generic, he probably would have been appreciative, but he probably would have just left it there. But the fact that I pushed him into a different place and he went with it and we had fun together, he would kind of go like, no, hang on, like there's something there. I don't mind doing that for this guy, So, but that's true. That's what it is. It's trying to get a human connection in a pretty inhuman environment, which is just, you've got 4 minutes, with whoever, and you got to come out the other side with 4 minutes, and you'll find sometimes these guys, like, they're but they're not really the problem. The problem is their agents and their people. Who are looking after them. I get it's their job, but sometimes they'll set boundaries or limits, and you're realizing that, like, Russell Crowe's another example. Again, I sound like dropping names here, but I had 12 minutes at Russell Crowe to talk about him coming to Ireland with his band, okay? Play a gig. That was my thing. And just as I went on, his assistant said, actually, another journalist has moved, so you've got 15 minutes with Russell. I was like, amazing. 15 minutes with Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe has a reputation of being, I would say, not difficult, but just maybe
prickly.
Yes, not particularly interested, perhaps. If he does a movie and part of his movie contract is he has to sell the movie, he's an artist and he cares about the acting. He doesn't care about making you go and see it. It's art. If you don't want to go see it, don't go see it, So this reputation precedes him, but actually it turns out is completely false. Then maybe he was talking about music and he does music. But again, I talked to Russell Crowe for 29 minutes at his decision. He decided, no, this conversation is ongoing. And put that interview out. I didn't put 29 minutes out on the radio. I put probably 14 minutes out on the radio and then pointed to the other The full 29 minutes is up there. The feedback I got in that interview is unlike anything I've ever gotten before about any interview. Just people did not expect to see that side of Russell Crowe, that engagement from Russell Crowe in a way that they did. And like, they're the things that you're proud of. They're the things that you realize, I can't talk to Russell Crowe for 29 minutes if I haven't done days of work. If I just rock up and read a brief that Emer has made for me or Cahill has made for me and have a quick flick through it, I can do 4 minutes and it'll be generic. But if I take their brief a week in advance and look through it and go, oh, he runs that Australian football team. Yeah, I forgot about that. He's actually, isn't he a big Leeds? He's a big Leeds fan. Okay, United just played Leeds in the FA Cup. I'm going to talk to him. Okay, and all of a sudden you see, but this is a week out. It's not the day of. You know what I mean? You don't have time the day of. You have to constantly be thinking all of the time, how can I make that human connection with this person? And sorry, that's another thing. People often ask me, am I ever starstruck? Because I get to sit in a room with these people, or virtual rooms or whatever, but a lot of time it's face to face. And I remember Donal O'Donoghue was one of my first big interviews. Amazing rugby player. And this was, again, back in the early days with myself and Dermot. And we were bricking it. Just like, he's Donal O'Donoghue. Like, what are they going to say? What if I get it wrong? You know, and we're feeding into each other's anxiety about it. You know what I mean? Like, God, you start. No, you start. No, I don't know. Like, you know, and this was our first big international interview. And one of the questions I had come up with was, he's so big and he's so strong and he runs through other rugby players like they're not there. I wanted to know, are you afraid of anything, Jonah? That was my kind of, my twisting slightly the question. And he just looked at me and went, oh yeah, my mum. And I lost it. And I went, of course he's afraid of his mum. He's an islander. His mum chased him around with a flip-flop and a tongue and smacked the head out. Like, and then I realised, in that instant, I went, he's just a bloke with a mum and a dad and a brother and sister and a girlfriend and whatever. Like, they all are. So I'm not starstruck when I meet Will Ferrell or Tom Cruise or Russell Crowe or whatever, because whether they're giving me their humanness or not, I know that's what they are. And I'm just going, you could be human having a bad day. So I might get a prickly Russell Crowe. I'm not going to be intimidated by that. I'm just going to go, he's a human. He's annoyed that he has to do 4 interviews in a row when he wants to be out having a coffee and meeting his mate. He's still a human. Like, that's his human reaction today. Fine. And that's really armed me in those situations where I can then project who I am into a scenario and get back, hopefully, who they are. And if it does work, 90% of the time it does. If it doesn't, it's fine, you know?
What would you do if you could go back to that long-haired, Metallica obsessed kid and tell him about the future? What advice would you give yourself if you had 5 minutes to go back?
Wow. I think I would reassure him that his gut is probably right, that taking risks, like risking being in a band by going to college, risking college by being in a band, risking going into the unknown by traveling to Russia and live there for a year in 1995 when my parents couldn't hear from me. There was no phones. I had to go and fax them a time at which they could call a hotel's reception number to try and get, it was wild at 19 doing that. Refusing the job in Moscow, taking a bank loan, working in a petrol station, studying jazz, going to LA with my girlfriend, coming back realizing that I need to live with this woman, but I can't because I have a job that pays me a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there, and being in a mindset to accept the radio job when it came along 3 months later because I wanted to live with my girlfriend. So I would tell him that to not be afraid to take the risks that he wants to take, because I know he wants to take those risks. But there's a voice in his head going, no, take the job. Go work for Anderson Consulting or go work for, PCW or whatever. You're coming out with a business degree. You can do that. Don't. Follow your heart. Figure out, it will be fine. I think that kind of reassurance that the risk taking is, certainly at that age, is fine. You can you can always come back to something. Now, I do think, okay, I got a degree, so I can fall back on my degree. I got a qualification in music, I can fall back. I got experience in the studio, I could fall back. I'm not saying be completely risky and, jump without thinking or planning, but take planned risks, take adventures that require you to do work and be prepped and all of those things, but take them,
Lovely. Where can people find you, your socials, if they want to follow you, and the podcast?
I'm very brand aware. I'm at Dave Today FM. I'm sure when I get sacked from there, I'll have to change to something else, but that's what I am for now. So that's where you'll find me doing all of just my stuff, whatever. There's a link tree in my bio with all the things. But yeah, look, Today FM, 9 to 12, Monday to Friday. A load of podcasts that happen from the show. Every podcast, there's a Dave Moore podcast. So all the interviews, all the crack, all the competitions, all the bits, if you want to listen to them, they're all there. And then myself and Neil, we do Why Would You Tell Me That? Wherever you get your podcasts. And it is just us trying our best to absolutely wow the other person with some wild story that you've never heard of, but you really want to tell your mates in the pub.
I need to go and dive into all that.
Honestly.
It's next on my to-do list.
Excellent.
Thanks a million for coming in. It's
Thank
much
you.
appreciated. And we will put all of those links into the show notes. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please follow our Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube. It's @talentmatters_podcast. And we'll see you next time. Oh, and thanks to our sponsors, Sanderson and Venero.